The sprawling estate of the Harrington family was a monument to success, a glassy fortress perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. Inside this luxury, however, a deep, silent despair had taken root. Ethan and Serafina Harrington, the golden couple of West Coast finance, were frantic. Their 10-month-old son, Liam, was supposed to be their joy, a miniature crown prince to their empire. Instead, for the last 8 weeks, he had been the source of relentless terror. Every night, like clockwork around 2 a.m., Liam would wake. Not with a simple whimper, but with a guttural, desperate gasp. His tiny chest would heave, struggling for air, his skin growing clammy and pale. The best pediatricians in the state had been through the nursery. They had run blood tests, allergy panels, and chest x-rays. Perfectly healthy, was the maddening consensus. Perhaps a new developmental stage, one had suggested, dismissing the Harringtons' fears with a wave of a manicured hand. But Ethan knew this was more than a stage. This was suffocation. Serafina, a woman used to controlling every variable in her life, was now a wreck. She paced the polished marble floors, her designer robes a contrast to her haggard face. "He's dying, Ethan," she whispered one morning, watching Liam sleep fitfully through the monitor. "Slowly, but surely. And we can't stop it." Ethan held her tight. "We will find it, my love. We have to. If the doctors can't, we'll find the cause in this house itself." The nanny's nose misses. Elara Reyes was a fixture in the Harrington household, a woman of 60 with the calm demeanor and sharp intuition that came from raising 4 children of her own. She was Liam's primary caregiver, and her worry was the most profound. She didn't trust the doctor's diagnosis of perfect health. She knew a baby in distress when she saw one. Elara spent her days meticulously cleaning the nursery, driven by an instinct that the answer lay not in Liam's body, but in his environment. She dusted the heirloom furniture, vacuumed the imported wool rug, and changed the linens daily. One Tuesday afternoon, as she was preparing Liam for his nap, she paused, her brow furrowed. She inhaled slowly. Something was wrong. It wasn't the usual scent of clean linen or baby powder. It was a subtle, earthy, and strangely heavy smell, like cut grass left to rot in the sun, yet sharper. It lingered only faintly, mostly noticeable right over the crib. It was a scent that spoke of the outside, a raw, organic presence in the sterile, air-filtered room. She leaned into the crib. The smell was strongest near the head of the bed, right where Liam's small face rested. That night, Liam woke at 2:15 a.m., his cries sharper and more agonizing than ever before. Ethan and Serafina rushed in, holding the terrified child until the attack subsided. The next morning, determined, Elara returned to the nursery. She ignored the expensive baby monitor and the electronic air purifier. She used her own senses. She knelt by the crib, following the faint, sinister scent that led her to one specific spot. Liam's pillow. She lifted the lace-trimmed, down pillow. Nothing. Then, she noticed the custom-made cotton pillowcase was tied shut with a nearly invisible satin ribbon, a fussy detail Serafina insisted upon. Elara untied the bow, slipped the case off the pillow, and a small, brittle, dried cluster fell onto the sheet. It was a piece of plant matter, a few dried, dark green leaves and a cluster of tiny, pale yellow seed heads. The heavy, sharp scent immediately intensified, filling the air. Elara recognized it instantly from her childhood in the countryside: nightbloom's breath. A common ornamental weed, beautiful but known to harbor highly allergenic pollen that, when concentrated, caused debilitating respiratory distress and lethargy. Someone hadn't just accidentally tracked it in. It had been deliberately placed inside the pillowcase, right where the baby breathed all night. A chill colder than the ocean wind swept through Elara. This wasn't a sickness. This was a sabotage. And the frightening realization was that the perpetrator was someone trusted, someone within the walls of the Harrington fortress. She clutched the damning evidence in her hand, her eyes wide with horror and a growing, terrible resolve. The battle for Liam's life was no longer against an unknown illness, it was against a known enemy hiding in plain sight. Elara Reyes did not panic. Panic was a luxury only the guiltless could afford. She knew the gravity of the situation. she was holding proof of attempted murder, and the perpetrator was somewhere in this house. She gently placed the dried plant matter into a small, sterile plastic bag used for leftover baby snacks, sealing it carefully. Then, she walked directly to the West Wing, to Ethan Harrington's private study. She found Ethan sitting behind his mahogany desk, two laptops open, surrounded by stacks of financial reports. He looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but low, "I need you to stop what you are doing. Now. It's about Liam." The urgency in her tone made him drop his pen instantly. "What is it, Elara? Is he worse?" Elara crossed the room and placed the plastic bag on the exact center of his clean desk blotter. "I found this," she stated, pointing to the brittle leaves and seed heads. "Inside Liam's pillowcase. It was deliberately hidden." Ethan frowned, leaning in. "What is it? A flower? Did Serafina bring something in?" "No, sir. This is the nightbloom's breath. It's highly toxic when inhaled over time, causing the exact respiratory distress and lethargy Liam has been suffering. Someone has been poisoning your son, Mr. Harrington. Slowly, every night." The color drained from Ethan's face. He didn't react with denial, but with a horrifying, gut-wrenching certainty that she was right. His son hadn't been sick, he had been attacked. "Poisoned," he repeated, his voice barely a rasp. He looked up at Elara, his eyes blazing with protective fury. Who? Who would have access? Only the staff and family. The inner circle. Serafina was called down immediately. When she saw the evidence and understood its implications, she didn't collapse or cry. Instead, a cold, aristocratic rage settled over her. "This is not a mistake," Serafina said, her voice slicing the air. "This is calculated malice. We must handle this internally. If the police get involved now, the perpetrator will cover their tracks and we may lose our chance to find them." Ethan, regaining his composure, agreed. Their family name, their reputation, everything would be destroyed if this scandal went public. They needed to flush out the viper in their own nest. "We need a list," Ethan said, pulling out a legal pad. "Who knew the sleeping patterns? Who had unsupervised access to the nursery and knew that particular pillowcase was used every night?" The list of suspects in the sealed-off world of the Harrington estate was frighteningly short. John Sterling, Serafina's brother, an investment banker who had recently been cut out of a major family trust Serafina had control over. He lived in the guest wing occasionally and had expressed open resentment toward Ethan. Chef Marie, the French chef who had been with the family for years. She was fiercely loyal but had a history of bitterness toward the new money extravagance, particularly Serafina's demanding nature. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, a quiet woman who had served the estate for 2 decades, long before Ethan and Serafina bought it. Her husband had been an estate groundsman who was laid off unexpectedly last year when Ethan streamlined the staff. Dr. Julian Thorne, Liam's pediatrician, who had insisted Liam was fine. While medically implausible, the idea of a doctor hired to fail to find a diagnosis was a dark possibility. Elara spoke up, her gaze fixed on the plastic bag. "Chef Marie and Mrs. Higgins have never been in the nursery alone, except for cleaning rotations. But Mr. Sterling was here 3 weeks ago. He had a very loud argument with Serafina just outside the nursery door." Serafina's eyes narrowed. "John is greedy, but he's not a murderer. He has nothing to gain if Liam dies, the estate still passes to us." "Wait," Ethan interjected, a terrifying thought clicking into place. "Who is the primary inheritor if Liam and I were out of the picture, Serafina?" Serafina froze. The family trust was complex, structured to incentivize a direct line. If both Liam and Ethan were gone, the entire bulk of the estate would default not to John, but to Serafina herself. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. You think I tried to harm my own son?" she spat, insulted. "No," Ethan said, looking past her, a new, cold calculation in his eyes. But someone else knows that structure. Someone who wanted you to inherit everything, and needed Liam to be the first casualty. The air in the study thickened with mistrust. The focus had shifted from a mysterious illness to a deadly conspiracy, and the primary suspect list just grew to include the last person anyone expected. The accusation that someone might want Serafina to inherit all of the estate hung heavy in the air, paralyzing her with a mixture of shock and outrage. But Ethan, the pragmatist, pushed past the emotional wreckage. "We need to be sure," Ethan declared, his gaze hardening. "The nightbloom's breath, it's not common. It's a noxious, prohibited plant in this county because of its extreme toxicity." "Where did they get it?" Elara stepped forward. "Sir, in the countryside where I grew up, it was sometimes used by old healers, but they kept it hidden. It needs specific soil, usually damp and shaded. If it's not from a controlled greenhouse, it must be growing wild nearby." Ethan grabbed his coat. "The grounds. This estate is massive. If someone is cultivating this, they wouldn't use the well-tended flower beds. They'd hide it somewhere forgotten." Serafina, regaining her footing, demanded, "I'm coming with you." "No, Serafina," Ethan said gently but firmly. "Stay here, near Liam. If whoever did this knows we found the evidence, they might try to silence it, or worse. You are the safest defense he has right now." He turned to Elara. "You recognize the plant. You come with me. You know what we're looking for." The search in the forgotten corners armed with heavy flashlights, Ethan and Elara ventured out into the vast, manicured grounds. The air was cool and salty from the ocean breeze. Ethan led them away from the polished lawns and toward the neglected, lower sections of the property. "Before we bought the house, there was an old service shed near the edge of the property line," Ethan explained, shining his light through dense, overgrown foliage. "It was the old groundsman's workshop, Mrs. Higgins' husband. I had it sealed up when we restructured the landscaping. It's probably full of rotten tools and debris, but it's out of sight." As they neared the rusted corrugated iron structure, the atmosphere grew heavier. The sharp, earthy scent that Elara had first noticed in the nursery was now unmistakable, overpowering the salt and pine. "It's strong here, sir," Elara whispered, gripping the flashlight. "Very strong. It smells like the whole plant, not just a clipping." Ethan kicked a low, rotting wooden door open. The shed reeked of mildew and decay. Inside, tucked behind stacks of antique terracotta pots and coiled, dusty hoses, was a small, well-tended grow area. A row of terracotta containers sat beneath a single, low-powered UV lamp plugged into a long-forgotten outlet. In the containers, the plant grew lush and dangerously green, a miniature field of nightbloom's breath. The gardener's confession. As Ethan stared at the horrifying sight, a low, rasping cough broke the silence from a shadowed corner of the shed. "I knew someone would find it eventually," a brittle voice said. Elara and Ethan spun around. Cowering behind a stack of garden bags was Mrs. Higgins, the quiet, unassuming housekeeper. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Higgins?" Ethan said, his voice laced with shock and disbelief. "What are you doing here? Did you plant this?" The old woman slowly rose, her eyes filling with a mixture of grief and simmering resentment. "Your company ruined my husband, Mr. Harrington," she confessed, the words shaky but clear. 20 years he tended this garden, only for you to streamline him out of a job and a pension just to save a few pennies. He lost everything. He lost his purpose. He died a month later, heartbroken." Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "I didn't want the baby to die. Not really. I just wanted Serafina to feel the helplessness. I wanted her to feel what it was like to watch someone you love suffocate slowly while the doctors do nothing. The same way her cruel carelessness suffocated my Thomas." She pointed a trembling finger at the nightbloom. "I only put a tiny bit under the pillow each time. I knew it wouldn't kill him fast, only make him weak, and make them miserable. I wanted them to pay for the pain they caused. The truth was a cold, bitter pill. It wasn't the sophisticated betrayal of a greedy family member, but the desperate, heartbreaking revenge of a loyal, forgotten servant. Her pain had morphed into a cruel form of poetic justice. Ethan felt a crushing wave of guilt and fury. Guilt for his corporate carelessness, and fury at the woman who had used his infant son as a tool for vengeance. "You risked my son's life for revenge," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. "We were worried sick. We thought he was dying." "You didn't care for the lives of the working people, Mr. Harrington," Mrs. Higgins retorted, her defiance fading into sorrow. "Now, you know what worry is." Elara stepped between them, her presence calming the explosive tension. "Mrs. Higgins, you need to come with us. This is over." Harika. Ber Hikayi 70.000 Character Uzatman en Theolu, Ilk Basta Kozulan Geisman Aslinda Daha Darren Ber Entrekanan Sadis Ber Perdezi Olduginu Ortaya Sikarmakter. Bu, Jeralimi ve Karakterlerin Psychologisini Daha de Karmasik Hale Gedira Sector, Hikayi, Mrs. Higgins in Intikamanan Arkasindaki Asal Karanlik Figuru Ifsa Ederek Devam Idlim. The baby cried every night, until the nanny found the terrifying secret under the pillow. Part 4, the unsettling aftermath. The discovery in the shed was a brutal climax to weeks of fear. Mrs. Higgins was quietly escorted back to the house, where Serafina was waiting, tearful and incandescent with rage. Ethan made the immediate decision to avoid the police. "The scandal would destroy us, and Liam's safety is paramount," he told Serafina. Though a small part of him knew he was also protecting his own reputation and the corporate carelessness that led to Thomas Higgins' death. Mrs. Higgins was given one choice: leave the property immediately, sign a non-disclosure agreement with a hefty severance package, and never speak of the night bloom. She accepted, her defiance replaced by exhaustion. She wanted only to disappear with her guilt. That night, Liam slept soundly for the first time in months, breathing easily in a nursery meticulously stripped of all fabric and airing out the lingering toxic pollen. The Harringtons finally felt a fragile sense of peace. The missing link, however, Elara Reyes, couldn't shake the unease. She sat in her small, neat apartment above the garage, replaying Mrs. Higgins' confession, "I only put a tiny bit under the pillow each time. I knew it wouldn't kill him fast, only make him weak." Elara was a mother, she knew what true malice looked like. Mrs. Higgins' motive, revenge through prolonged suffering, was believable. Yet, the method felt slightly too clinical for a heartbroken, untrained housekeeper. Elara opened a sterile plastic bag containing the plant matter. She looked closely at the clipping. It wasn't crudely torn, the stem had been cut with a precise, clean diagonal slice, the mark of a professional gardening shears or a scalpel. Mrs. Higgins claimed she only wanted to make them miserable, but Elara remembered Liam's worst night, 2 weeks ago, when his breathing had stopped for agonizing seconds. That attack had been far more severe than the others. Elara went back to the nursery the next morning, ostensibly to arrange new, hermetically sealed linens. She knelt beside the crib, running her fingers along the mattress edge. Her eyes caught something small and metallic wedged deep within the seam of the thick crib mattress, near where the pillow rested. It was a tiny, perfectly round, brass-colored rivet, the kind used in high-end leather goods, not in nursery furniture. The suspect returned. She pulled it out, and as she did, the image of John Sterling, Serafina's estranged brother, flashed in her mind. John was known for his ostentatious, high-end Italian leather satchels and briefcases, often adorned with exactly this type of signature brass hardware, but John Sterling hadn't been to the estate for 3 weeks, and Mrs. Higgins had claimed responsibility for the entire 2-month period of attacks. Elara's heart pounded. Mrs. Higgins had been hired to make Liam suffer, but perhaps someone else had used her suffering and distraction to deliver a lethal dose during her absence, or perhaps someone else had been involved all along, using a different, faster method. She needed to check the security logs. Only Ethan had access, but Elara knew his password, the birthdate of his deceased mother, a fact he'd shared in a moment of stress. Later that evening, while Ethan and Serafina were out for a mandatory, strained, date night, to appear normal, Elara slipped into the study. She logged into the security system. She navigated to the exterior camera logs for the West Wing, checking the day of Liam's most severe attack. 2 weeks prior, the footage revealed what she had feared. At 3:30 a.m., just an hour after the worst episode, a dark figure was seen scaling the small wall near the guest wing, a figure too tall and broad to be Mrs. Higgins. The figure moved swiftly, melting into the shadows near the house, carrying a large, distinctive leather satchel, the kind John Sterling carried. The image was grainy, but the shape of the bag, and the height of the man, were damning. John had been here, secretly, and likely not for a cordial visit. He hadn't just argued with Serafina, he had executed a precise, potentially fatal action. The terrible truth began to unfold. Mrs. Higgins was merely the cover story. Her low-level, slow poisoning created the distraction and the symptoms, making the family look for a small-time saboteur, while the true killer, John Sterling, aiming for a swift, lethal blow, used the cover of the family's exhaustion and the ongoing sickness to deliver a single, deadly dose of concentrated pollen, perhaps the very day his rivet fell from his bag. He wanted Serafina to inherit the whole fortune, yes, but why? He was estranged. Unless he was working with Serafina, the thought hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. Serafina hadn't denied the possibility of wanting the full inheritance with enough conviction. She had been too cold, too quick to forgive Mrs. Higgins and sweep the whole thing under the rug. Alara now held two secrets, the planted nightbloom, and the suspicious return of John Sterling. She needed to know who was truly pulling the strings. The baby cried every night, until the nanny found the terrifying secret under the pillow. Part V. The trap is set. Alara knew that presenting the grainy security footage and a tiny brass rivet as evidence to Ethan would be risky. Ethan was emotionally compromised, too ready to believe the Mrs. Higgins narrative was the end of the matter, and his loyalty to Serafina ran deep, despite the inheritance structure. If she accused Serafina and was wrong, she would be instantly fired and silenced. She decided to play a dangerous game. She would use the perceived resolution of the crisis to draw out the real conspirators, the decoy and the message. The key lay in the nightbloom itself. Mrs. Higgins' supply had been found and removed. But if John Sterling was the true saboteur, he would need another source for the toxin, or he would believe the first attempt was complete and his job was done. Alara printed a single, slightly blurry still from the security footage showing John's profile in the shadows, focusing on the outline of his distinct leather satchel. She did not show it to anyone. Instead, she crafted an anonymous email. She used an old, untraceable public Wi-Fi signal in town, ensuring the message could not be traced back to the estate or her personal devices. The email was simple, brief, and cryptic, addressed only to John Sterling's private, rarely used address. Subject: The gardener's secret message. The night bloom grows wild by the cliff face near the old boathouse, not in the shed. The final piece of the legacy is still breathing. Your friend is waiting. Your friend is waiting. This was a calculated risk. If John was working alone, the message would confuse him. If he was collaborating with Serafina, the ambiguous phrase would prompt the accomplice to check on their partner, a crucial step in exposing their collusion. Serafina's sudden compassion. The next day, Serafina was markedly different. With Liam safe, she was buoyant, almost unnaturally so. She began lavishing Alara with praise, offering a substantial bonus and a 2-week paid vacation, a clear attempt to get the sharp-eyed nanny out of the house. Alara, you saved my son, Serafina said, placing a cold, heavy hand on Alara's shoulder. I insist you take this time. Go relax. We can manage Liam now that the threat is gone. That is very generous, Mrs. Harrington, Alara replied calmly, meeting Serafina's gaze. But I couldn't leave Liam right now. I feel responsible for his safety until I am certain he is completely out of danger. Serafina's smile tightened, the warmth never reaching her eyes. There is no more danger, Alara. The threat was a disgruntled old woman. She's gone. I hope so, Alara said simply. The rendezvous that evening, Alara positioned herself. She knew the cliff path near the boathouse was steep and rarely used, offering maximum privacy. She borrowed a pair of binoculars and settled into the hidden niche of the old lighthouse at the edge of the property, overlooking the meeting spot. The air was damp and cold. Alara waited, heart pounding, relying on her intuition. At precisely 11:45 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows near the garage, tall, elegant, wrapped in a dark cashmere coat. It was Serafina Harrington. She was not heading to bed, but down the treacherous cliff path, moving with a clandestine urgency that betrayed her usual pampered gait. Serafina reached the small, rocky clearing near the boathouse and stood waiting, looking nervously at the ocean. A minute later, a second figure appeared, approaching from the main road, not from the estate itself. It was John Sterling. He looked furious. "What the hell was that email?" John hissed, his voice carrying clearly on the sea air. "You said it was handled. You said the nanny found the housekeeper's stupid herbs and the matter was closed." Serafina grabbed his arm, pulling him into the shelter of a large boulder. "It was closed. That woman was the perfect scapegoat. We set her up with the night bloom she was already growing. We just made sure she used enough to create a crisis, but not enough to kill him outright. The problem is, someone else knows about your primary source." John pulled away. "My primary source is secure. And I didn't get that email from you." "Did you send it, Serafina? Was that you trying to play games?" "Of course not." Serafina whispered fiercely. "But that's why I'm here. I need to know you didn't leave any loose ends. If the nanny or Ethan finds out about our partnership, it's over, John. We don't get the trust. We go to prison." The truth, stark and chilling, finally materialized. Serafina and John were in a lethal conspiracy. Mrs. Higgins was merely a pawn, a distraction, who was already growing the plant for revenge. Unknowingly creating the perfect cover for the true assassination attempt orchestrated by the siblings, Elara, shivering in the cold, realized that Serafina's plan was far more cynical than simple revenge. She wanted the undivided, liquidated trust fund, a fortune only attainable if Liam and Ethan were both permanently removed. John was likely her accomplice, promised a sizable cut of the future inheritance. Elara raised the binoculars to see their faces clearly. John, agitated, reached into his coat pocket. "The job needs to be finished, Serafina," he snarled. "We can't wait for another accident. The market is volatile, and we need that capital now." He pulled out a small, metallic object. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tiny, specialized syringe, containing a clear, viscous liquid. "This is concentrated extract from the night bloom," John explained, his voice low and clinical. "It will act instantly, mimicking cardiac arrest. 1 drop on Liam's pacifier tonight, and the official records will show a sudden, tragic infant death syndrome, no toxicology, no suspicion." Serafina looked horrified, but only momentarily. "Tonight? But Ethan is here. I'll be quick." "You ensure the nanny is distracted," John insisted, pressing the syringe into her hand. "The timing is perfect. No one will ever suspect the grieving mother." Elara lowered the binoculars. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to expose them before dawn. Hakayanan bu nocticinda, Jerilaman zervid kalmasi ve Elaranin zekasinin 1 sigmasai isen, de Grudenberg katismea germisai en wiganutter. Enkak, Serafine v Janu bur araya getiresek, Ethanin de tanik alakaji zikas bur tazaga etiasam isvar, Elara, Ethane de Gruden jersajai soilmek urine, onu bur tanik olarak koenikak bur scenario kurgulea coctor. Baby. The baby cried every night, until the nanny found the terrifying secret under the pillow. Part 6. The midnight broadcast. Elara scrambled down from the lighthouse niche, her body shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline of absolute terror. She held the weight of Liam's life in her hands. Serafina and John were planning to execute the final act tonight. She ran back to the house, avoiding the main doors and slipping through the service entrance, activating the insurance. Elara didn't trust Serafina's ability to pull off an immediate, silent execution. John had given her the syringe, Serafina would try to administer it. But the real danger was John. He was out there, lurking, waiting to ensure the job was done. Elara moved with practiced stealth toward the master bedroom wing. She knew the layout intimately. She didn't go to Ethan. Instead, she went to the library, where the house's central sound system console was located. Ethan, the tech mogul, had insisted on having the entire house wired for music and notifications, including the ability to broadcast audio from any room to any other. Elara knew the emergency override code. She quietly entered the nursery. Liam was sleeping peacefully, a small, fragile life unaware of the darkness circling him. Elara looked at the expensive baby monitor perched on the dresser, the monitor that broadcast everything into the master bedroom. She took a deep breath, knowing her next actions would determine the fate of the family. She opened the microphone on the baby monitor, not the main audio feed, but the backup intercom function. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice clear and urgent into the monitor. "I need you to wake up immediately. Go to the security room and pull up the footage from the West Wing 2 weeks ago. I found a brass rivet, and I think Mrs. Higgins was a distraction. I need your help before Serafina gives him the medicine." She knew Ethan would be listening through the monitor on his bedside table, assuming she was speaking to him directly, fearing she was in danger. She had implicated Serafina just enough to make him act, but not fully reveal the conspiracy. The trapped confessional era then quickly returned to the library, logged into the audio console, and activated the global broadcast setting, a function usually reserved for emergency announcements. She linked the nursery intercom feed to broadcast silently into the security room, where Ethan would certainly be heading, and to the main living area. She then went to the master bedroom. Ethan's side of the bed was empty. He had reacted to her broadcast and was already moving toward the security room downstairs. Serafina's side was also empty. Elara raced back to the nursery. Serafina was already there. Serafina was standing over the crib, her back to the door, the small, deadly syringe glinting under the dim nightlight. She didn't hear Elara enter. "I'm sorry, my perfect boy," Serafina whispered, her voice laced with chilling false pity. "You were just an obstacle. Your father and I were miserable long before you came. But he wouldn't let go of the trust until you were here. It's better this way, darling. You'll stop crying." She raised the syringe, intending to place the single, toxic drop on Liam's lips. Elara moved. She didn't scream or fight. Instead, she activated the external audio speaker in the nursery, which was linked to the intercom she had set up. "He's right, Serafina. You should have finished the job 2 weeks ago." Elara projected John Sterling's voice, taken from a recorded family dinner conversation and amplified through the speaker. Serafina spun around, terror contorting her beautiful face. She thought John was in the room, watching her. "No. John, wait," she hissed, trying to silence the invisible voice. "I have to do this. He won't let go of the control. He thinks I love him, he thinks I'm the grieving mother. But without Liam, the trust liquidates, and we take our half." "What half, Serafina?" Elara used her own voice this time, calm and clear. "The whole thing goes to you, and then to John. Ethan is the only thing standing between you and hundreds of millions." Serafina's composure shattered. She looked wildly around the room, the syringe shaking in her hand. She thought the room was bugged, that John was betraying her, that her secrets were being broadcast. "You don't understand." Serafina cried out, a full, desperate confession pouring out, the microphone capturing every word. "I tried to talk to him. I told John to give Mrs. Higgins the plants and create the distraction. But Ethan wouldn't budge. He wouldn't sell the company. I had to get rid of the heir so he would finally lose his focus." The witness downstairs, in the security room, Ethan Harrington stood frozen. He hadn't seen the West Wing footage, he hadn't needed to. He had heard everything. Every whisper, every desperate word, every heinous detail of his wife's calculated betrayal, broadcast with sickening clarity through the main speaker system he had installed for entertainment. The sound of his wife's confession was 1,000 times worse than seeing her face. Ethan didn't move toward the police. He moved toward the nursery, grabbing the first heavy, blunt object he saw, a heavy, silver-plated ceremonial letter opener. The confrontation. Ethan burst into the nursery. Serafina, still disoriented by the voices and the terror of exposure, looked at him, her confession still hanging in the air. "Ethan," she gasped, trying to hide the syringe behind her back. "It's not what you think." "I heard everything, Serafina," Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion, a cold, empty echo in the silent room. "You didn't want him to stop crying. You wanted him to stop breathing." Just then, a loud, urgent knock echoed from the front door. It was the final collaborator. Elara knew the plan wasn't complete without the second criminal. "It's John, Mr. Harrington. He's here to finish the job." Mukemel. Hakayanin bu kater yüksek gerilimli bir anda, Ethan'in nihayetinde medeni v yasal yalarabas vurarak bir finans devinin segukanlıcını göstermesi, karısının silcanlıcıla keskin bir tezit oluşturacaktır. Bu, karakterin daha uygun v hikaye daha trajik hale getiren bir bitiris olacaktır. Baby. The baby cried every night, until the nanny found the terrifying secret under the pillow. Part 7, The Reckoning. The loud knocking at the front door confirmed Elara's fear. John Sterling, having received the cryptic email about the final piece, had come to the estate to ensure the lethal injection was administered or to handle any complications. Serafina, seeing Ethan's dead eyes and the letter opener clutched in his hand, realized the extent of her catastrophic failure. Her confession, meant for an imaginary accomplice, had been the undoing of her entire plan. "Ethan, please," she pleaded, dropping the syringe in a desperate attempt to appear harmless. "It was just a moment of madness. I was under stress about the trust." Ethan didn't look at her. He looked at Elara, whose presence was a silent anchor of sanity in the poisoned room. "Call the police, Elara," Ethan commanded, his voice shaking with a controlled fury that was far more terrifying than a shout. "Tell them there is a man at the door attempting a break-in and that my wife has poisoned our son. Give them the address. Use the landline. Now." Elara nodded, her hands already moving toward the antique telephone in the corner, ensuring the emergency call was placed quickly and discreetly. The capture. Ethan then moved with the precision of a CEO executing a hostile takeover. He didn't approach Serafina. He walked straight past her, out of the nursery, and down the marble staircase, the silver letter opener hanging uselessly at his side. He was walking toward the greater threat. John Sterling. John, growing impatient with the unanswered door, had begun to tamper with the lock. He looked up just as Ethan appeared in the brightly lit foyer. His usually impeccable clothes disheveled, his face a mask of betrayal. "John," Ethan said, the name a cold epitaph. "Ethan? What the hell is going on?" "I came because Serafina called me." "Something about the police," John started, trying to play the concerned relative. "Don't insult me," Ethan cut him off, his eyes boring into John's. "I heard her. I heard everything you planned. You used the night bloom, you used Mrs. Higgins, and you planned to murder my son tonight for a share of my money." John's composure cracked. He lunged, not in attack, but in a desperate move toward the living room, aiming for a swift exit through the veranda. But before he could take 2 steps, the first police siren cut through the silent night, approaching the estate with chilling speed. Ethan blocked his path. "You are finished, John. Serafina confessed, and the police are on their way." John, cornered, realized the gravity of his situation. He was caught on the property, and the evidence, the shed, the missing gardener, the now found syringe, would all connect him to Serafina. When the local sheriff's department swarmed the estate minutes later, they found a bizarre scene: the multimillionaire couple's distraught housekeeper making a hurried phone call in the library, the estate owner standing in the foyer, blocking the escape of his brother-in-law, and the socialite wife sitting numbly on the floor of her infant son's room. Surrounded by newly sealed linens, the residue of the night bloom faintly staining her hands, the long silence. The investigation was swift and devastating. John, offered a plea deal, quickly implicated Serafina, revealing the full extent of their financial motive. The Harringtons Trust Fund, structured by Ethan's late father, only liquidated the vast majority of its assets upon the absence of the direct heir and the subsequent passing of the surviving spouse, a measure designed to prevent a hasty divorce and asset division. Serafina and John had intended to kill Liam, then eliminate Ethan through a staged, business accident, leaving Serafina the sole inheritor, after which she would split the hundreds of millions with her brother. Mrs. Higgins' revenge plot was merely a convenient, blinding diversion they co-opted. Serafina Harrington was arrested and charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. John Sterling faced similar charges. The resulting scandal ripped through the global financial community and the social circles of the West Coast elite. Ethan Harrington was left devastated. He had lost his wife, his brother-in-law, and his naive faith in the security of his own home, all in one night. The gleaming fortress on the cliff was suddenly cold and empty, a monument to greed and betrayal. The end of the nightmare. In the weeks that followed, Ethan sold the estate. He couldn't bear the thought of Liam growing up in the room where his mother had tried to end his life. That he kept only one person, Elara Reyes. Elara was offered the position of Liam's permanent guardian and the full management of his care. She accepted. Liam, now sleeping peacefully every night, slowly began to thrive. He was no longer the sickly, gasping baby of the last 2 months, but a happy, healthy child. One quiet afternoon, months later, Ethan watched Elara gently sing a lullaby to Liam in their new, modest home far from the ocean cliffs. "You saved his life, Elara," Ethan said, his voice finally regaining some warmth. "But you saved more than that. You saved me from the madness, and you saved Liam from the darkness." Elara simply smiled, her eyes fixed on the baby. "My job is to care for him, Mr. Harrington. And to ensure that no darkness, great or small, ever touches him again." The baby, Liam, nestled safely in the arms of the one person whose integrity was stronger than the walls of a mansion, finally slept through the night. The silence in the house was no longer the eerie silence of a hidden sickness, but the deep, reassuring peace of a true home.